Lock in your $1 million May at the Rose Gaming Resort. Earn entries all month long for your shot at becoming a millionaire at the grand finale Sunday, May 24th. Over $1 million in jackpots paid out weekly at the Rose Gaming Resort.
Make your mornings effortless with the new Nespresso Virtuo Up machine. From bold espressos to rich lattes, brew flavorful coffee hot or over ice in just 3 seconds. All it takes is a simple press to enjoy your perfect cup. Shop now at Nespresso.com.
Hi there, and welcome to the Explaining History podcast. So it's been a few days since I've been able to record. At the moment, I'm doing slightly less recordings than I normally would like to, partly kind of to do with life being extremely hectic, and got to kind of conserve energy and things like that. So it's sometimes looking to get things out there, and it's just not possible. So anyway, here we are. So one of the things I wanted to talk today about is a bit more of Eric Hobsbawm's Age of Extremes. I wonder if we could be described as being in the kind of second Age of Extremes. More than one fairly kind of distinguished scholar recently has posited the idea that we are in a third world war. America seems to be waging war globally. There is, of course, predating Trump, Ukraine. We have Gaza, Iran, Venezuela, threats to Greenland, strange explosions going off in refineries all the way around the world. From the Gulf states to Australia, and ships being intercepted. It feels kind of global. Perhaps we just need China's invasion of Taiwan to really cement the idea that we are in a new age of conflict. And previously, the first age of conflict, I mean, I go with the Richard Overy argument that there is a kind of an ongoing imperial conflict from 1914 to 1945. I mean, arguably longer, with a kind of a brief break in the middle for kind of a switching of allegiances and alliances and rearmament. And a continuation up until we reach a kind of nuclear moment. Perhaps the 21st century will be like that. Perhaps the 21st century will be a long period of imperial encounters, primarily because of America. The kind of, not the absolute decline in American power, but the relative decline in it, and the emergence of a kind of a multipolar world about which so much has been written. So, yeah, we're diving back into the age of extremes, and this is the kind of Hobsbawm's overview of the 20th century. Here he talks about the kind of the paradoxes of the Second World War. Only the temporary and bizarre alliance of liberal capitalism and communism in self-defense against this challenger, Nazism, um, saved democracy. For the victory over Hitler's Germany was essentially won and could only have been won by the Red Army. In many ways, this period of capitalist-communist alliance against fascism, essentially the 1930s and 40s, formed the hinge of 20th century history and its decisive moment. In many ways, it is a moment of historical paradox in the relations of capitalism and communism, placed for the most of the century, except for the brief period of anti-fascism, in a posture of irreconcilable antagonism. The victory of the Soviet Union over Hitler was the achievement of the regime installed there by the October Revolution. As a comparison of the performance of the Russian Tsarist economy in the First World War and the Soviet economy in the Second World War demonstrates, without it, the Western world today would probably consist, outside of the USA, of a set of variations on authoritarian and fascist themes, rather than a set of variations on liberal parliamentary ones. It is one of the ironies of this strange century that the most lasting results of the October Revolution, whose object was the global overthrow of capitalism, was to save its antagonists both in war and peace. That is to say, by providing it with the incentive, fear, to reform itself after the Second World War, and by establishing the popularity of economic planning, furnish it with some of the procedures for its reform. So there is a kind of a deep irony here. I mean, it doesn't need to be kind of overstated that the end of the Soviet Union is a disaster for social democracy. The only reason for social democracy existing after 1945 was because there was a viable alternative in the guise of revolutionary socialism. The only reason why capitalist elites in Western countries created, for the most part, relatively threadbare welfare states was that they had to. And that the much of the kind of the advances, and again, this concept is decried by right-wing and liberal economists the world over, but many of the advances of the post-war era was the product of industrial strategy and state planning. And it was the triumph of neoliberalism that ripped this not just physically in terms of deindustrialization from the heart of Western countries and Western economies, but intellectually and almost kind of spiritually. The idea that, in British kind of political intellectual discourse for the last 50 years, the moment that anybody says, well, perhaps we should plan the economy, either Stalinism is brought up or you'll return us to the economic doldrums of the 1970s if you even think about that. And of course, the economic crises of the 1970s are caused by oil shocks, not by the idea of a kind of an industrial strategy. And now the kind of the great elephant in the room of the 21st century is the fact that China and its huge advances is the product of industrial strategies and state planning. Still, even when liberal capitalism had or only just survived the triple challenge of slump, fascism and war, it still seemed to face the global advance of revolution, which could now rally around the USSR, which had emerged from the Second World War as a superpower. And yet, as we can now see in retrospect, the strength of the global socialist challenge to capitalism was that of the weakness of its opponent. Without the breakdown of 19th century bourgeois society in the age of catastrophe, there would have been no October Revolution and no USSR. The economic system improvised in the ruined rural Eurasian hulk of the former Tsarist Empire under the name of socialism would not have considered itself nor being considered elsewhere as a realistic global alternative to the capitalist economy. Of course, as Marx has said, that Russia probably wasn't the place to try revolution. It wasn't developed enough, and it wasn't ready. And revolution happens in Russia kind of because the conditions don't exist for it to happen anywhere else. Marx believed that revolution should probably happen in Germany. He thought actually reformism in Britain would probably provide the working classes with what they needed. And so in Germany, it was considered that the material and kind of intellectual conditions were just right. Um, and so it's the most unlikely and perhaps unfortunate place for a socialist revolution to begin. The economic system improvised in the ruined rural Eurasian hulk of the former Tsarist Empire under the name of socialism would not have considered itself, nor would be considered elsewhere, as a realistic global alternative to the capitalist economy. It was the great slump of the 1930s that made it look as though it was so, as it was the challenge of fascism which made the USSR into the as it was the challenge of fascism which made the USSR into the indispensable instrument of Hitler's defeat, and therefore into one of the two superpowers whose confrontations dominated and terrified the second half of the short 20th century, while, as we can now also see, in many respects stabilizing its political structure. The USSR would not have found itself for a decade and a half in the middle of the century at the head of the socialist camp, comprising a third of the human race, and an economy that briefly looked as though it might outrace capitalist economic growth. Just how and why capitalism after the Second World War found itself, to everyone's surprise, including its own, surging forward into the unprecedented and possibly anomalous golden age of 1947 to 73 is perhaps the major question which faces historians of the 20th century. I think anomalous there is a very important and ominous word. And again, when we look from the 21st century back to the golden age of post-war capitalism, of rising living standards across the Western world, this era of kind of mass consumption, of growing life expectancy, of generous social welfare, of rising wages, of rising life experiences. It's where, working class people were able to live suburban lives with foreign holidays, with access to cars and modern appliances, all this kind of stuff. Stuff that you would describe as the American dream, stuff that you would describe in Britain under Macmillan as never having had it so good. And there are obviously, French and German and Dutch and Australian and Japanese equivalents of this. Not every country in the world, not every part of the world gets to share in all of this. But the idea that was an anomaly, that that energy prices, that security, and that the freedom from kind of external shocks and sort of specific historical conditions created that, and that it has been in decline since the end of the Cold War, unraveling now into unprecedented crises across the Western world. As people rightly wonder, where have all the good times gone? Where have where has all of that disappeared to? There's a brief kind of uptick briefly in the neoliberal era for maybe from the 80s and into the 90s, when Western societies deindustrialize themselves, sell off all their assets. There are kind of stock market booms, and then we really switch from productive industrial capitalism to rentier capitalism. In Great Britain, for example, all the great state-owned industries and utilities have all been sold off, and we are essentially renting the infrastructure of our own lives back from global capital. and that's only a recipe for everybody to get poorer and poorer and poorer. And I suppose we live now in the actual conditions of capitalism, the more kind of red in claw and tooth conditions of capitalism, that this brief anomalous moment in the 50s, 60s, and 70s where welfare states were created. It's not to say that they are by in and of themselves unsustainable, but they're unsustainable when they come under sustained pressure from capital accumulation. So we have this extraordinary moment. There is as yet no agreement on an answer, nor can I claim to provide a persuasive one, as to how mass prosperity emerged. I mean, I think there are ideas there. Probably more convincing analysis will have to wait until the entire long wave of the second half of the 20th century can be seen in perspective. But although we can now look back on the golden age as a whole, the crisis decades through which the world has lived since then are not yet complete at the time this is written. However, what can already be assessed with great confidence is the extraordinary scale and impact and the consequent economic, social, and cultural transformation. The greatest, most rapid, and most fundamental in recorded history. Various aspects of it are discussed in the second half of this book, which we will get to one fine day. Historians of the 20th century in the third millennium will probably see the century's major impact on history as the one made by and in this astonishing period. For changes in human life it brought all over the globe were as profound as they were irreversible. Moreover, they're still continuing. The journalists and philosophical essayists who detected the end of history in the fall of the Soviet Empire were wrong. A better case can be made for saying that the third quarter of the century marked the end of 7 or 8 millennia of human history that began with the invention of agriculture in the Stone Age, if only because it ended the long era when the overwhelming majority of the human race lived by growing food and herding animals. And this is, a great understudied question of the 20th century is how and why it is that a majority of the human race, which has shifted from peasantry to urban working class life. And up until the end of the Second World War, a majority of all human beings were peasants, subsistence farmers living off the land, or small tenant farmers, or small market farmers. And this is an extraordinary fact. If you take Russia, China, India, South America, Africa, the Middle East, parts of Europe, there's most human beings. And the transition away from peasant life was an extraordinarily rapid one, which again it goes kind of underexplored.
An official message from Medicare.
I turned 65 this year. I knew it was time to figure out Medicare, and I had questions like when to enroll and how to enroll. So I went straight to the official source, Medicare.gov, to get the facts about Medicare. I found answers to all my questions, and I'm ready to get started. And so can you. Just go to Medicare.gov to get the real facts about Medicare.
Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
While every other channel is fighting for your customers' attention, podcasts are where they've already given it. No one accidentally listens to a podcast for 45 minutes. They choose to be here. They trust the voice in their ears, and when that voice talks about your brand, it doesn't sound like advertising. It sounds like a recommendation from a friend. Acast gives you that trust at scale. Digital precision, host-read authenticity, and performance data that proves it worked. Don't fight for attention. Buy it with Acast. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.
We're in a moment now where certain historical trends, certain historical processes, I think, have reached their culmination. Take, for example, the death of the kind of social democratic third way of politics that we see exemplified in the ongoing destruction here in the UK of the Labour Party and the seemingly kind of the desperation by the Democrats in America to kind of remain unelectable. This was, I mean, if you imagine that when the neoliberal era emerged, destroying the post-war consensus, parties notionally of the centre left recognised or came to believe that the politics of the economic right were the only things that were ever going to work again. They abandoned wholesale the tenets of the post-war social order, commitment to full employment, the idea that state intervention, that industrial policy, that social welfare, all of these things could, as Keynes put it, could be counter-cyclical, could iron out the crises and contradictions that tends to lead to boom and slumps. They thought that that capitalism didn't need to be rescued from itself anymore. In fact, that the problem was that it had been fettered, and by letting it loose, one could use its dynamism to generate wealth and power and pay for perhaps a reduced degree of social services, a reduced kind of degree of social welfare. And of course, in 2008, this explodes. And as, whilst I hate to quote him, Friedrich Hayek said that, the ideas that are littered on the ground, one needs to simply pick up and employ when a crisis comes along. There are no ideas lying on the ground certainly none that the establishment left to centre parties in the Western world choose to utilize in 2008. I mean, there are ideas, the Occupy movement, for example. There are intellectuals like David Graeber, who, as a key figure in the Occupy movement, was presenting alternative visions of all sorts of things. But these things are, of course, easily swatted aside by the needs of power itself. And so, because there was no alternative vision post 2008, we exist in this kind of zombie moment where you have the political right, the conservative political right, morphing into this kind of kleptocracy under people like Trump, and in other places Orban and people like that. And then you have instead of a kind of a debate about whether or not the returns from the economy go to capital or labour, as one would have argued in the 20th century. The debate is instead whether corruption or managerialism is the optimum solution, whether the kind of the Trumps, the Orbans, the reform parties of the world, who exist on kind of culture wars and kind of this sort of kleptocratic kind of orgy of looting the state, whether they will be the future.
Get a jump on next summer with Vrbo's early booking deals. Don't wait to claim your dream summer spot, whether that includes a good porch swing or a poolside lounger. When you book early, you get the best places at the best prices. But back to poolside loungers. With Vrbo, you don't have to reserve any loungers. They're all yours. In fact, the whole private home is yours. Book with early booking deals, and you can lounge around all summer long however you please. Book with Vrbo.
You've never been one to settle. Stand down or stand still. You're a lifelong learner, energized by excellence. There's a fire inside you can't ignore. You've got competition to outrun, momentum to build on, and your own high standards to meet. Stop now? Not a chance. At Capella University, we help you catch what you're chasing because you've always had the drive. Now, go earn the degree. Capella University. What can't you do? Visit capella.edu to learn more.
Or a rather kind of timid, bland, unable to provide any meaningful solutions to anything, managerialist, representative of the kind of what we call the professional managerial class, whether they can provide a kind of meaningful governance, which I mean, and of course neither can. You have the spectacle of permanent crisis under right-wing populists like Trump, or you have a managerial class. Look at the Labour Party here in Great Britain, which is absolutely and utterly co-opted and beholden to capital. It's there really to do this thing that John Gray talks about, this idea of triangulation, where you essentially bullshit the public for long enough and talk about essentially fairly, positive sounding kinds of things about without specifically committing to any kind of redistribution of wealth and power. You talk in kind of bland generalizations and bromides about progress and hope and can we do it, and getting the job done, and all this sort of stuff. And instead you enact policies as Obama did after his victory in 2008, which largely benefit a financialized class, and in doing so reinforce the rentier structure of Western economies. Now this has led to the implosion of social democratic parties the world over, because they've all taken that route, and it has directly benefited right-wing populists, not because everyone thinks yes, these people, these comically awful leaders are exactly what we want, but it's because those people that would have voted for social democratic policies either stay at home, or they vote for or the vote fragments through other left parties, or you get people that are not necessarily kind of rabidly actively racist, because that's always going to be a minority in any society, but people who think, well, this guy Trump or whoever it is going to smash up the system that I hate, so let's let him do it. And of course the truth is, a man with a golden toilet will never smash up any system that instead that they can loot. So I think we're at the end of that cycle. I think now here, and this is again, I think one of the great transitions of the 21st century is the death of the kind of the centre left parties of state, and hopefully we will have something across the Western world, particularly and beyond, looking more authentically democratic on the left. Hopefully, Hobsbawm obviously is Marxist, and so his analysis of history is kind of materialist, and his view of the reasons for change are always kind of based in kind of I suppose macroeconomic transitions, and that's why I think it's still, if he were around today, it would be just interesting to know what he would make of the moment we are in. I think you'd probably see it as a moment of decay, where, as Gramsci put it, one thing, one era is in decline and another has yet to be born. It might be that the era that is to be born will not be born in Europe or America, and the assumption, or Great Britain, and the assumption that it will be is a bit of a Western conceit. It might be, and in fact, it looks increasingly likely that not just a pluralistic, we're not just entering a kind of like a pluralistic world, but we're entering a world where the center of gravity shifts eastwards to India and China, and that the crises that we exist under at the moment are the product of this great transition, this great reorienting of the world back towards the east. Where, in all fairness, most of the history of the human race for the last 5,000 to 7,000 years, or even longer, has been its center, and so our times of crisis now, I think, are perhaps, the great macro explanation is perhaps that. Anyway, at risk of rambling on, I'm going to stop there. And I will catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. Take good care, folks. All the best. Bye-bye.
Doug.
There's nowhere I wouldn't go to help someone customize and save on car insurance with Liberty Mutual, even if it means sitting front row at a comedy show.
Hey everyone, check out this guy and his bird. What is this, your first date?
Oh, no. We help people customize and save on car insurance with Liberty Mutual together. We're married. Me to a human, him to a bird.
Yeah, the bird looks out of your league anyways.
Get a quote at libertymutual.com or with your local agent.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
You've never been one to settle. Stand down or stand still. You're a lifelong learner, energized by excellence. There's a fire inside you you can't ignore. You've got competition to outrun, momentum to build on, and your own high standards to meet. Stop now? Not a chance. At Capella University, we help you catch what you're chasing because you've always had the drive. Now, go earn the degree. Capella University. What can't you do? Visit capella.edu to learn more.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.